If you're a good leader, Susan, and I work for you, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to work smarter, I'm going to be loyal, and I'm going to stay.
It's time to rethink everything, to redo the rule book, to explore smarter ways to work and rediscover what's possible. It's time for a fresh take on how technology and creativity are changing the way work gets done. I'm Susan Campbell, and this is the Big REthink. Leadership's such a hot topic because people have such different definitions of what makes a good leader. Some people are drawn to the outgoing, the magnetic presence, while others prefer a more hands-off, quiet leadership approach. While we might have different perspectives on what makes a great boss or executive, there are some traits all good leaders have in common, and each of us can build those skills to become good leaders in our own way. In a hybrid world, it's about knowing how to cultivate these skills alongside technology and use our tools to our advantage. Today, we welcome Karen Culligan to the podcast. A speaker, consultant, and leadership expert, Karen is the founder of REthink, a comprehensive suite of leadership and team development programs that help executives, teams, and individuals improve both their performance and that of the organization. Karen's signature program, Keep It Real, educates new and advancing leaders to be bold, competent, and confident. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Susan, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I love to talk about leadership.
Well, I'm impressed that you found some time for us today with everything that you do. Such an interesting resume that you have, or resume is not the right word, but such interesting perspective. Tell us a little bit about REthink and your role at the company.
Yes. Well, I founded REthink in 2000. So, Susan, I come out of technology. And So when I started REthink, I thought, well, don't I get to do what I want to do? And so I thought, well, yes, I do. And so I wanted to focus on that leadership development and that team development, because I've always done everything around people initiatives, hence the name of my company. So my goal has always been, how do I move people from point A? I don't care if you want to go to point B or point Z. We really want to work with those leaders, those teams, to help them figure out how, in fact, to do that. So that's kind of where REthink came from. And again, back in 2000, it's kind of crazy that I've been around this long doing the work that I really love.
That's awesome. So now it's fascinating to me. You say you come out of technology, but you always put people first. And sometimes those two things are not always on the same plane. Like if you would have said you had an HR background or something, you would think, oh, natural progression, people think. So how do you get from background in technology to start your own company, People First, about getting people from A to Z?
Yeah. Well, Susan, I worked at a tech company and my focus was always on the people initiative. So I wasn't in the technology side of the house. I recruited for technology people at times, and then did many other initiatives around leadership, mentoring, career, and that type of thing. So when I came out, that's where that progression happened.
Gotcha. Well, companies are always focused on leadership. It's a trait that employees and employers are always looking to try to master. Where's the first place people should start when they're trying to become a better leader?
Yes. Well, the first place to start is with themselves, and that's really around self-awareness. So Susan, the thought is, who am I? Who do I want to be as a leader? And then where are my gaps? What do I have to do to fill in order to make sure that I'm bringing my unique value to the organization? And what's so interesting, what you were just talking about, I mean, organizations have and will continue to put leadership somewhere in their realm of development. However, the issue is that there's so many ways to define leadership that becomes an issue if the organization doesn't really think about what is our culture of leadership. So as we promote leaders, they really have an idea of how do I have to develop for my role. And that's where we're seeing there's some disconnect these days, is that organizations have been so busy. What do we do with the pandemic? Oh, then we're going to have remote work. Oh my goodness. What do we do about getting technology in everybody's home? Oh my goodness. And so, and then all of a sudden, what do we have? We have the Great Resignation, then we have quiet quitting, and then we have burnout. And so, it's just been this whole progression since the pandemic that people are thinking, well, holy moly, what do I do about leadership? And how do we get back on this bandwagon to say, okay, now let's begin to focus again on leadership?
Yeah. Wow. That's quite the progression we've had even in just the last 5 years about.
Yes.
And I love what you said too, Karen, about how the organization has to define what leadership means to the organization.
Yes.
I think always when there's, sort of leadership initiatives or whatever, they focus on the folks going through those programs. And there's not as much maybe as is necessary discussion on what the leadership of the company, from the company's point of view, what they want leadership to look like. It's all about building skills, right? Yeah.
That's exactly right. And, the big thing for me around leadership, just as we're talking about, the culture for each organization is what I call the head and the heart. And so you have to have expertise. You have to be competent. However, it's the heart piece. It's that emotional intelligence that's going to make a leader a great leader. And the emotional intelligence is all around, do I have empathy? Do I know my team? Am I communicating the way they need me to? Am I collaborating? And so for me, when we think about the leadership model, we have to put in that emotional intelligence so that when people say, oh, it's the soft skills, it's actually, Susan, the hardest thing to do. And organizations need to think about that.
And I'm sure the hybrid world has flipped that script on its head, right? That's got to have how I communicate or what my team needs, or how do I show empathy in a hybrid or a distributed or a remote model?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And when I think about the challenges that leaders have in that hybrid world, Susan, what I really think about are two. I think about leadership training, because it hasn't been happening through this, what we just talked about, this whole continuum since the pandemic started. So there's an organization called the Joss Bersin Organization, and they did a leadership development study. They just finished it up. It was 2 years in November. And what they found is that leadership development kind of fell off the wayside for all the reasons we just talked about.
Right.
And so in the hybrid world, as we're asking leaders to step up and step in, what we're forgetting to tell them is, oh, by the way, we'll train you in order to do that. And lead organizations aren't doing that right now. I mean, this is an insane number, Susan. 47% of people who get put into leadership roles have never had any leadership training. That's crazy. And you think about, what do leaders do? They're the differentiator. It's why I'm going to stay. People join organizations and they're leaving leaders. So it doesn't, there's no correlation to me on growing business and not training leaders. So
Right. Well, it's like that quote, and I can't think of who said it, but what if we spend all this money training them and they leave? It's like, what if we spend all this money, don't spend any money and they stay, right? So
exactly, that's exactly right. That is exactly right. That's exactly right.
And you get training by default by your experience. And so if the company isn't formally investing in any of that training, just the current course and speed of the culture or how things get done is the de facto training.
That's exactly right. And so some of us have had great leaders, and we're so lucky to do that. I always think the greatest learning is from the worst leader that you've had. However, if you don't really think about it and you don't spend that time doing the self-assessment work, what's going to do, just what you said, de facto is I might take on
become
those
that
habits.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly right. Even though you don't want to, and you think, it couldn't possibly be me. I would never do that. And you find you're emulating it because you don't know any
different. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, Karen, I can totally understand that. So where's the opportunity for growth here? As we're continuing in the hybrid, many cases continuing in the hybrid world, right? So
Yes.
what can companies do, or people who are in a leadership position who maybe that 47% who haven't had any formal training, what can they do to
Yeah.
address that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing they have to do is, I'll say again, the training. They have to ask for the training. They have to demand the training. And if enough people ask, then organizations might even step back for a minute and think about it. And again, the studies are coming out these days of what has happened through the pandemic and what has happened with leadership. If the senior leaders begin looking at some of those statistics, they will sit back for a minute and say, my goodness gracious, this really is impacting the bottom line. How are we going to recruit and retain new top talent who wants to continue to grow if we are not training the people? It makes no sense. The other thing I think for opportunity for growth is really, we've talked about technology. I mean, technology is a beautiful thing. It's here to stay, obviously. Thank goodness it's here to stay. And yet there has to be some consistency around these models. So if we start thinking, okay, technology, absolutely, we're going to use it. How are we going to communicate with technology? Susan, we've got Slack, we've got IM, we've got text, we've got, Skype,
There's
got
no
Teams.
shortage. Yeah.
There is no shortage. And what happens if there isn't a consistency in a group or in an organization, then there's going to be frustration because information is going to be missed. And then all of a sudden people are saying, well, I didn't hear from XYZ, but I did. It just so again, consistency for communication. All of us were on a video conferencing platform right now. And if we go back, we need consistency. When I do video conferencing, and it's going to be a large group, I always try and have a producer or someone that's helping me. And we went through it, Susan, before we got on the call today. We needed someone to help us really make sure the technology would work. So, and then when someone is facilitating and a leader is using that technology, they have to make sure they're doing the polls or using the chat. I always say cameras on, because when cameras are off, we all know everybody is multitasking. And we also know multitasking does not work. So there has to be standards from the leader. And then the third thing around technology is really that content collaboration platforms like the Google Doc. Which one are we going to use? Are we going to use MS365? Are we going to use Google Docs? So technology can be our absolute best friend until it isn't. And the isn't is when we're not using it consistently or it doesn't work.
Right. So behind a consistent use of technology, how else can technology enhance your leadership presence?
Yeah, well, I mean, it can be a wonderful use of communication. So the way that I look at leadership, again, we just talked a little bit about, the head and the heart part. I mean, there's other parts of leadership, certainly around vision and culture and inspiring and strategy and so on. But when I get back to the head and the heart, it's important for the connection. And so technology can be a great connector to people. And again, that's why I say, cameras need to be on. I want to see the whites of the eyes. Technology will never take up that place where I'm in front of someone. However, it can really be incredibly useful. And we can get like the 80-20 where, let's have this conversation. If I'm going to build trust with you and we're in a hybrid world, the only way I'm going to do it is if I have conversations with you. And if it's technology, so be it. Yay. Lucky for us that we have it. So I think it's really, really important that a leader really pay attention to that connection. And every single person is different. And what do they need from a connection perspective? They have to build the trust so that, in fact, when technology comes on, it's a useful, strong tool for us.
Yeah, it's almost, it's interesting as you're talking through that, I thought of eye contact, right? When you're talking to somebody and they're not looking at you, there's no eye contact when you're person to person, face to face in the physical world.
Right.
But the same holds true even when you're talking to somebody on a video conference And maybe they have two monitors, and the monitor where their camera isn't the monitor that they're looking at. And just that eye contact absence or presence can make a huge difference, like you said, about making that true connection head and heart with your audience.
Yes. And what I talk about all the time, the whites of the eyes, there's something about being able to look at someone and see the whites of the eyes. It tells you so much, and you can see so much with that kind of presence. So technology can really be our dear friend, and it can be our evil devil too.
Like when you're talking and you're right, or when you're talking and you think your microphone is off, or
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So on a personal note, just how have you worked to cultivate your own personal leadership style through a screen? Like, what advice would you offer? What are some key takeaways you've had as you've gone through this journey and have shared your knowledge with so many others?
Yes. What's really important is clarity of self. And I said it earlier, that self-awareness thing. So I've done all the work, like my Keep It Real leadership program. I've gone through the whole thing multiple times to make sure that, it's where it needs to be. And so therefore, I've done the work on myself. I know what my values are. I know what I'm really good at. I know what I really am not so good at. And I understand those gaps. I understand my communication style. Again, I worked really, really hard to do that. And so when I show up on a video conference or doing any kind of hybrid type of work, even if it's on, Slack, text, any of those types of technologies, what I do know is I show up as Karen, and you're going to get exactly who I am, whether I'm in front of you or not, because I've done the work. I'm really proud of where I've gotten to at this point. And I feel like I need to come to this place whole. And so when I show up, here's Karen, and that's what you're going to get. And I think that's really important for people, again, to go back to that unique value. What does each person bring to the table? And the only way they're going to know that is if they do work on themselves and really assess their values and their competencies and as we talk, communication style and so on.
And I love that you've enumerated them, because a lot of people talk generally about self-awareness or bring your whole self or all those kinds of, just sort of sweeping generalizations. But I think it's so helpful to kind of itemize it. It's about your values and the value you bring, right? Your competencies, what your gaps are, and your communication style. I mean, that, those are key cornerstones to understanding and becoming self-aware. I think that's so helpful to break it down that way. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that, Karen.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing about this, once you're clear about who you are, especially around the values, I think values are really your guiding light. You can make the easy decisions, but more importantly, Susan, you can make those really difficult, hard decisions, and you still can sleep at night because they're based on your values and
exactly.
And you know who you are. So it's hard work. I mean, leadership is hard work. Hybrid work is hard work, and people have to really take the time for themselves and their teams. Yeah.
Yeah. So last question, and it's kind of two-part, but I'm still just wrapping my head around this statistic of 47% of leaders have never had formal training. So what's your recommendation to those folks, right? So if, clearly ask your company, but what's the best way to go about asking? And then if you don't think your company is in that kind of a position, how do you do it personally for yourself, for your own personal growth?
Yeah. So of course, ask. And when you ask, you have to be very, very specific about what you're asking for and why you're asking for it. And so depending on the organization, maybe they do have leadership training. I'd like to be in this leadership training. This is why. This is where my career is headed. I've had my performance review with my leader, and this is what I'd like to be able to do. That's great. For the case that you're talking about with companies that don't have leaders, don't have a leadership program, couple things. be bold enough to say, okay, how about if I work with HR and we start talking about the importance of leadership within the organization? It's a development opportunity for me, and it's only going to help the organization because we know that leaders make all the difference in the world in terms of fiscal performance. If you're a good leader, Susan, and I work for you, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to work smarter, I'm going to be loyal, and I'm going to stay. Mm-hmm. So that makes a big difference. So those are just two things in-house. If you want to really understand leadership, then you need to go, there's only 8 trillion, and I've counted them, leadership books. Right. However, you start asking people, like, what are you reading? What about leadership? What should I know? Simon Sinek is great. He's got great books. The Leadership Why, I think, is brilliant. It's small. I like small books because then I'll read them. When they're too big and too theory, it's like, oh, who needs it? So you can read books. You can go to conferences. You can talk. Keep It Real Leadership Program. Hello.
What took you so long, Karen? That was a layup question.
Yeah. Wow. You were handing me a beautiful gift. I was like, wow. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Keep It Real Leadership Program. And, if your company, so here's what else I'll say. If your company is not willing to step up and really start talking leadership, are you in the right company? And you may be, and you might say, that's great. However, if you want to be a strong leader and your company doesn't value that, and that's not part of the leadership culture, I don't know, start looking somewhere else.
And you know what? That is exactly to what you were saying before about how does your organization define the leadership culture? Yes. And there you go. If it's not a match, it's not a match. You either have to decide to conform to their definition, or if you want to pursue your own definition, you got to find some place that aligns with your values. So
correct.
A wonderful bow on this package. Wow. There are 8 trillion articles on leadership. And I have to tell you that this was just such a refreshing conversation, and just at a very tactical, kind of digestible, short book version, like you were saying, right? It's enough to really get you engaged and get you thinking, but stuff you can really digest and understand and take action about. So thank you so much, Karen. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, Susan, thank you. And when we're learning, there's so much noise, Susan. So let's keep it simple. Let's keep it smart, and let's keep it applicable. Well, there's too many other things going on. So that's kind of how I view the world. And it's just. Yeah. So thank you, Susan. It was
simple,
great conversation.
Smart, and applicable.
Yes.
That I can remember. 3 things, right? So
exactly.
Before we sign off, if you've enjoyed this podcast today, you can help us grow by visiting our feed on Apple Podcasts to rate, review, and subscribe. Or if you're listening on Spotify, be sure to hit follow. That's it for us. I'm Susan Campbell, and that was another episode of the Big REthink.